So, this is going to be my second video where I take a close look at the main character of Goblin Slayer, Goblin Slayer. Again, I get how that can be confusing, so just remember that whenever I say Goblin Slayer, I'm referring to the person, and the show I'll simply refer to as the show. Now, I gotta say, Goblin Slayer has easily become one of my favorite fictional characters. And to me, one of the biggest strengths of Goblin Slayer is how relatable he is. That's the idea that I'm going to be expanding upon in this video. I basically said all this before, but this video is going to explore this idea from a slightly different angle. And honestly, it's a more personal one for me. See, if it's not obvious, I identify myself as an otaku. For those who are just completely lost, otaku is basically the Japanese word for geek. I believe the exact definition is someone who has a very obsessive interest, usually to the detriment of their social skills, which would most definitely describe Goblin Slayer, but it's mostly used to refer to geeks who specifically obsess over anime, manga, and/or Japanese light novels. Now, much like geek culture at large, over time, many have come to embrace the term otaku, and it's pretty much become its own very proud subculture built around the shared love and appreciation of these particular art forms. Now, while I may throw around the term geek here and there because I do think it is the more widely understood term, it does feel more natural for me to say otaku since I am talking about anime, but yeah, it's basically the same thing. Now, Goblin Slayer is not what most would consider to be an otaku. At least, not by the standards most people use. And yet, I would dare to say that Goblin Slayer embodies the ideals and struggles of the average otaku more so than any of those other fantasy anime protagonists that are supposedly otaku. This is because while he may not be an otaku in the traditional sense, in many ways, he serves as a clever parallel to one. I mean, he's highly obsessive with a particularly niche interest, the intensity of which can push away others. He has weak social skills, he has trouble understanding emotions, he's considered odd by those around him, he's a loner, an outsider, he has anxieties, he has insecurities. The point is, this show, and Goblin Slayer himself, actually dive into a lot of the issues that are prevalent with otaku. The rest of this video, I just want to spend taking a closer look at each of these traits, one at a time, and I want to explore how they're exhibited in different moments from the show, and how they affect his everyday life. Also, I'll try to go into why I personally relate to that trait, and what can be learned from Goblin Slayer's portrayal of it. Now, I do want to go ahead and lay out a couple of things before getting any further. I don't want to imply that all otaku suffer from every one of these issues, and if someone doesn't, they aren't a real otaku. I do think it's undeniable, though, that there are some common personality trends among the otaku demographic. Some stereotypes are not completely unfounded. Again, I am an otaku, and you know what? I do happen to have trouble in social situations. And sometimes I let my passionate interest get out of hand. And man, do I have my fair share of anxieties. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that I like these parts of myself all the time, but they are, nonetheless, a part of who I am. The way I see it, ignoring these parts of me would be denying a side of myself. And it would also be denying all the hard work and effort I've put to overcoming these weaknesses of mine. In my opinion, the best fantasy series don't just provide you with an escape from the problems of the real world. Rather, they try to provide you with a unique new perspective that you can take with you into the real world, to actually use that fantastical story to better understand the real world around you. And, in this case, maybe help you better understand the real you. Okay, let's first start off with what is probably his most pronounced trait, his obsessiveness. Now, It's no secret that this man is obsessed with goblins. He's dedicated his entire life to goblin slaying. He's studied them for years. He's memorized all their habits. He knows how they think. He only takes up goblin slaying missions, refusing to take on any other kind of quest. Nope, it doesn't matter what the situation is. It doesn't matter if the entire world is at stake. If there are no goblins involved, he is not interested. I think it should be pretty obvious why I would compare this part of him to an otaku. I mean, obsessiveness is pretty much the main, literally defining element of an otaku. It's simply that while otaku are obsessed with anime, manga, and things like that, Goblin Slayer is obsessed with goblins. And of course, while the fixation of an otaku normally comes from a place of love, Goblin Slayer's is fueled by hate, but it's still an obsession all the same.
You try to figure out the best way to kill them the next time. This would be the only thing that occupied your mind. You'd test every idea you came up with, no matter how absurd. And against your better nature, you'd start to enjoy it.
Now, something a lot of real-life otaku struggle with is keeping their obsessions in check. Hey, there's nothing wrong with having a very passionate interest in something. However, there's a line where those interests can start to become unhealthy. This could be like pushing off important tasks in favor of watching anime or wasting all your savings on anime merch. But also, if you put all your focus into one area, you risk closing yourself off to new experiences, and you can end up neglecting those around you. Those last two are definitely problems Goblin Slayer himself struggles with. Sometimes otaku just need to be reminded to rein it in a bit for their own good. And that's something Goblin Slayer himself learns through the series. No, he doesn't give up goblin slaying altogether. He doesn't need to go that far. It's a huge part of his life, and goblin slaying isn't really a bad thing. It is helpful to a lot of people. By the end of the series, he learns that he needs to take a step back from it for a bit sometimes, and keep himself a bit more open to new things.
When we get back, there's something I'd like to make.
A new kind of weapon, I'm guessing?
Ice cream.
Now, the intensity of his interest in goblins can certainly push others away. We see this right away in the second episode, when Goblin Slayer just walks into the guild hall and suddenly everyone stops what they're doing to stare at him and talk about him behind his back. This scene is the first to establish that a lot of the other adventurers see Goblin Slayer as kind of a weirdo, because of how he only focuses on goblins. It's something not many of them really understand. Basically, he's different and that makes them uncomfortable. See, taking on Goblin Quest is very odd for someone of his rank. Goblin slaying is typically seen as work for the newer adventurers. There are even some accusations that he only takes on Goblin Slaying quests because they're easy prey. Heck, I could compare this whole thing to how animation and comic books have long been seen as kid stuff by many, with geeks being seen as weirdos for being into it. And it's pretty much a classic cliche that geeks are social outcasts. I mean, I think this has certainly changed over time, with geek culture pretty much becoming synonymous with pop culture at this point. Still, geeks can struggle with forming and maintaining social connections for a number of reasons. And, indeed, his isolation is not solely due to the attitude of those around him. Goblin Slayer is also just kind of a loner. Now, this doesn't mean he's completely antisocial. He does make a handful of close, meaningful connections with people that he clearly values very deeply. Still, he does seem to prefer to stick to himself a lot of the time, and he doesn't prioritize making connections, and is all around more comfortable keeping others at a good emotional distance. Now, I think many would take that and assume that he's a very cold, unfeeling person. And I think many would assume that he's not the type to be affected by what people think of him. But it does. He may not be very open about it, but I think it really does. We get a hint of this in episode 2, where he mumbles to himself how he's not really what people expect of a silver rank. And there's this one moment toward the end of the show where he says to Priestess that he didn't think anyone would voluntarily help him out because he's weird. So yeah, it does seem like what people say about him does affect his self-image. He just doesn't show it a lot of the time. And I mean, he really shouldn't. It's shown that he definitely has the skill level of other silver ranks, he just exhibits it in different ways. And like I said, goblin slaying is very valuable work that saves plenty of lives. However, even for someone as badass as Goblin Slayer is, it can be hard to escape what other people think about you. Or what you think people think about you. And I really think making him vulnerable in this way really humbles and humanizes Goblin Slayer, and just makes it all the easier to relate to him. Now, it also doesn't help with Goblin Slayer's popularity that he's just kind of overall lacking in the area of social skills. Honestly, this might just be the aspect of his that I have the most examples within the show to pull from. And also the aspect I probably most personally relate to. Okay, like, there's this moment in episode 3. Priestess has been having some doubts about her partnership with Goblin Slayer, and whether he actually sees her as, well, a partner.
He's taking everything I have just to keep up with him. And all I do is cause him trouble.
When she finds out that he accepted this big quest without talking to her, she's very angry and hurt, thinking he just intended to leave her behind without talking to her first, to which he responds,
"We are, now."
So then, this is a discussion?
Isn't it?
It doesn't really qualify as a discussion if the other person doesn't have a say.
Yeah, this is something I definitely struggle with myself. Recognizing when I need to fill someone in on what I'm planning. I don't know, I've just kind of become used to doing things my own way, not really having to talk to people about it, but that approach doesn't really work as great when there are other people involved. I figure out a solution for something and I just kind of go and do it without, like, really telling anyone what I'm doing, and I end up, like, stressing them or making them worry or... Next, in episode 10, Priestess finds Goblin Slayer at the guild getting his equipment repaired on one of his days off, and she says Goblin Slayer should have told her he was gonna be there, and he just says he didn't feel the need to. Which is a totally honest and not ill-intentioned answer. I know this because I have totally done this before. He just has trouble thinking about the other person's side of it. I don't think he really understands. She's saying she would have liked to meet him. No, it's not a necessity to inform her, but it would have been nice. But he has trouble thinking about it from that kind of perspective. Also, he's criticized by Priestess for always responding to her with the same simple replies.
What's wrong?
What's wrong? Are you kidding me? What's wrong is you seem incapable of answering me with anything other than yeah.
I see.
You say that all the time too.
I'll try to stop.
This is something I do a lot too. I tend to fall back on giving basic and kind of vague answers to questions people ask me, and sometimes it just develops into this automatic response. Even then, I figure it's better than saying nothing at all, which is my instinctual fallback. Seriously, I have on multiple occasions been compared to a piece of furniture. It's not that I'm trying to be rude or that I'm completely uninterested in what other people are saying, I just have trouble coming up with what to say in a lot of situations. The one exception being, if it pertains to something like anime. Then it's the opposite problem. I don't know when to shut up. This is the same for Goblin Slayer, but of course on the topic of goblins rather than anime. And really, Goblin Slayer isn't trying to be a jerk. He can be very understanding and flexible, like in the clip we just saw. He doesn't blow Priestess off, he hears her out, and he agrees to try to fix these bad habits of his. As long as he still gets to slay goblins, he's pretty much good with whatever. So yeah, like I've pretty much been saying, I'm not good at socializing with people. I know I have hurt the feelings of people around me before, because I can come across as cold or uncaring. It's gonna happen. But to me, the best thing to do when that happens is what we see Goblin Slayer do. Talk to each other about it. Listen to each other, and try to work to patch those issues. Might not be able to fix it right away, but just gotta keep on trying at it. Effort is important. Now, I don't think it's just other people, though. There are times I think Goblin Slayer also has trouble understanding his own feelings as well. As for some examples, in episode 5, there's this moment where Cowgirl, Goblin Slayer's childhood friend, comes over to have a conversation with him while he's checking out the fences. She tells him that he should be getting some more rest because he just recently came back from a difficult mission. To which he mentions how another adventurer also commented on his refusal to take care of himself as a bad thing. She's just delighted to hear that he's actually interacting with other adventurers and being social. She asks if they've been going on a lot of adventures together. Goblin Slayer says just once so far, and she points out that the way he words that implies that he plans to work with them again. He immediately responds, with some surprise, "Does it?" Then, he takes some time to ponder this notion and says, "I see." See what I mean? He has to think about it. In episode 10, Cowgirl comments on how Goblin Slayer's friends are such nice people. He then asks, "Are they?" He says that what he does know is that they're skilled and he has a higher probability of slaying goblins with them around. That's the way Goblin Slayer's mind works. He approaches things from a very practical and logical standpoint. So, it makes some sense that emotions are something that elude him. Sometimes logic and emotions don't really seem to mix. I don't know if this just sounds odd to people, but I personally relate to this a lot. And I like to think this applies to a lot of people, even if they're not really aware of it. It's like when you feel something, but you can't quite explain why or what exactly it is that you're feeling. You don't really know the answer off the top of your head because emotions aren't something you just plan out. You might rack your brain for a while looking for an answer, and if you come up with an answer, it might not actually be the real one. You're just trying to put it in a way that makes sense to you. And you know what? That's actually part of the reason as to why I wanted to do this video series in the first place. It wasn't just because I wanted to share my opinion with others, but I wanted to use this to really encourage myself to sit down and really sort out my own feelings for myself. To push myself. To put words to how this show made me feel. To better understand myself and why it is that I liked this show. Why it is that this show made me feel the way that it did. And you know what? It has, I think. And now that I better comprehend why I felt the way I did, I have to say, I actually feel a lot more secure about my opinion. And I have a lot more confidence when I say that this is a good show. I know that I really mean it. It isn't just for some shallow reason. This show really connected with me. And now, I want to try to help more people get the same kind of positive experience out of the show that I did. Now, let's talk anxieties. Always a cheery subject, I know. So, Goblin Slayer is consistently a very precautious and even paranoid individual. We can see this on numerous occasions when he's out on the job slaying goblins. But it doesn't just turn off once he clocks out. Even on the farm he calls home, he has this daily routine of checking the land for goblin tracks and touching up the fences, and we actually see him doing this several times throughout the series. The reason he gives for never removing his helmet is so that he's always prepared for a surprise attack. Even the whole tagline, "he doesn't let anyone roll the dice," is another indication of his paranoia. He's not one for taking chances. Now, it's true that many of Goblin Slayer's relentless precautions do end up helping him and his allies survive through many dangerous situations. And the first episode certainly shows what can happen when people aren't cautious enough. However, I appreciate that the show also warns of the opposite extreme, letting your anxieties rule over you. For this, there's one scene I really want to talk about. This is during the Watertown arc. After a close call with the Goblin Champion, Priestess and Goblin Slayer are just kind of taking a day to relax and recuperate. They get some ice cream from some street vendor, and they're just sitting down on a bench by the water. Then, they start talking about the town, and Priestess points out how strange it feels that the people are just going about their normal everyday business despite deadly goblins roaming around in the sewers beneath them. Goblin Slayer then says that there was a time when he thought if he took a single step, the ground might randomly open up beneath him and he would die. Now, this may sound like an odd fear at first, and I kind of thought so too, but then I thought about it more, and I do personally have some fears like this. Things that are very unlikely to happen, but are still ever-present possibilities that you can't help but worry about. There are a lot of things out there that can just kill us randomly. Things we can't fully predict or control. Is it likely to happen? No, not necessarily, but he's not saying it is. It doesn't really matter if it is. Just the possibility is enough. I mean, what guarantee do you have that the floor or the ground you're about to walk over is stable? But, as he says, it's not the kind of thing that everybody worries about. He talks about how the fact that people weren't afraid of this like he was very strange to him, and how people laughed at him for it. I'm sure that didn't feel great. Like I said before, even though he may not be very open about it, other people's opinions of him do affect him. People shouldn't feel ashamed for their fears. I like it when Priestess says, "We can't help what we're afraid of." And that's true. It's not something we choose, it's something that just happens naturally. We can't really control what we're afraid of. However, we can control how we deal with that fear. Goblin Slayer says that because of this fear of his, there was a time he hesitated to even walk, but he realized he still had to. Regardless of whatever our fears are, we can't let them hold us back. We still have to live our lives. After all, if we waste all of our time being afraid of dying, we can't really appreciate the time that we have to be alive. And that's not saying the solution here is to just stop being afraid. In fact, Goblin Slayer says he's still afraid to this day. He's just powering on through. Okay, I'll probably wrap up soon, but I really want to take the time to talk about how much I appreciate that this show can pull off this kind of scene so well. I'm referring to these slow little scenes where two characters can just sit down and open up to each other about their anxieties. And not in some kind of big melodramatic outpour. I'm talking about something a bit more subtle. I'm talking about someone revealing something very personal, the kind of something you just don't go around sharing, because it can make you feel uncomfortable and weak. This exchange between Goblin Slayer and Priestess felt very real to me. And it's not necessarily because the dialogue is so well articulated, but actually, it's rather because it isn't. I can just hear the hesitation and nervousness in their voices, and those long pauses of thought in between. The right words in these types of moments don't normally come so easily. They're both awkward and unsure. They're opening up and yet still guarded at the same time. After all, he's showing a vulnerable side of himself that he usually keeps hidden. And for her, that kind of thing would put a lot of pressure on her to say the right thing. He's obviously putting a lot of trust in her. Look at that face she has. She doesn't really show any particular emotion, not even concern or surprise. She's just taking it all in. I just feel like I've been there before, on both sides, and I know I can't be the only one. And let's be honest, in said situation, you or your friend were probably drunk at the time. Simply put, I love this scene. And there are more like it in the show. Another great example of this kind of scene would probably be in episode 10, where Cowgirl and Goblin Slayer are talking about their future. I certainly could have brought that one up as an example of anxiety too, but I think I'm going to save talking about that one for a later video. Honestly, I think I'm ready to call it quits on this video. So, I hope by now I've made it clear why I find Goblin Slayer so relatable on the level of being an otaku, and why I love the ways this show explores these aspects of his character. If you still want to hear more about Goblin Slayer, don't worry, I have one more video that's going to focus solely on him, and then I'll probably move on to something else.
The Goblin Slayer swung his blade, fierce wretchedness he now would purify. Goblin corpses he cut through as the heads flew high. Oh, courageous warrior, with a sword that's tempered in perfect silver, never will the blade betray its purpose or its way.